Hello, writer, and welcome back to my life. It's Writer Wednesday, where I give you my best tips and advice on the art and the business of writing and tell you how I do what I do as an indie author. As per usual, today we're answering a question from one of my $5 patrons on Patreon, and today's question comes to us from thatninja, who asks, how about writing relatable anti-heroes, i.e. traits, values, beliefs that, while not exactly in line with those of a more atypical heroic nature, are enough to allow us, the reader, to sympathize or potentially identify with the character? Thanks for your question, thatninja. Real quick, we have to define what an anti-hero is for anybody out there who doesn't already know. An anti-hero is essentially a protagonist, a hero of a story who is good, not evil, but who is not exactly in agreement with society about what good means. A particular trait of the anti-hero is that they do not necessarily obey or abide by the laws of the land, particularly when they see those laws open to abuse or leading to bad things happening. They can also be prone to habits, vices, or otherwise that in general society views as immoral or at least undesirable. This can be things like gambling, drinking, homelessness, etc. Things that are not necessarily bad in and of themselves, but which society does not approve of. And an anti-hero generally has a sort of disregard for the law in general or whatever authority figures may happen to exist. Now, you can play around with various factors of these. For example, I'm going to talk about Dexter from the show Dexter in this video a lot. He's not somebody who, flies in the face of the law. He works with the FBI, but he's not exactly for the law either, is he? If you're familiar with Dungeons & Dragons alignment types, they can actually be really useful in understanding the anti-hero. An anti-hero is generally not going to be lawful. They're either going to be neutral or chaotic, and they're also not going to be evil, so they're either good or neutral. So that gives you that little quadrant of neutral good or true neutral, or chaotic good or chaotic neutral. Although, to be an anti-hero, I would say that you should lean more towards the good side of things, because an anti-hero is not an evil character. You can have such a thing as an evil protagonist. In other words, the main character or the hero of your story is actually a bad guy. That's a thing you can do, but that's not an anti-hero. And the reason why actually plays into something I feel like we've been talking about a lot on the channel recently, which is that if you portray an evil protagonist like an anti-hero, you are accidentally going to create sympathy and, I guess, understanding and agreement with evil, which I don't think is something you should do with your writing. In other words, you can have an anti-hero where you're like, yeah, this guy doesn't necessarily conform to the law or what other people think is good social conduct, but he does the right thing and he's a good person because of that. Whereas an evil protagonist is, this person's bad, and I'm going to create an interesting story surrounding them, but they're bad and you should not be like them. And if you create your evil protagonist in an anti-hero sort of light, that's when you get situations like Tyler Durden, where a large part of your audience is trying to emulate the exact thing you're actually speaking out against. Now, this line, it is true, can blur, again, as in the case of Dexter. Dexter's not an evil protagonist. At the same time, he's not somebody that you should want to emulate or be like necessarily. I don't think anyone who wrote the show or created the show or the actors involved would ever want anybody to be like Dexter. At the same time, he's very definitely an anti-hero and not an evil protagonist. So this is a blurry line, but I do think that there is a surefire way to tell if you've got an anti-hero or an evil protagonist. And it's actually something that I realized while I was writing this video. And what I realized is that an anti-hero almost always realizes or knows or at least thinks they're not a hero. They think they're a bad guy or that there is something wrong with them or they know this to be the case. Take Han Solo, a very classic example of an anti-hero. This changes in the second and third movie, but in the first movie, he's very much like, no, I'm a smuggler. I'm not your hero. I'm not some knight in shining armor riding in and saving the princess. I'm doing this for money. Now that actually, that's not really entirely true, is it? He does do good things and in the end ends up saving the day because he comes back for unselfish reasons, but he thinks, nope, in it for myself. Not a good guy, not a hero. Going back to Dexter, he knows there's something deeply wrong with him. He knows he is a serial killer. he has just decided to funnel serial killing into a productive contribution to society. Dexter rides a very, very fine line, so it's good for helping to illustrate the clear difference between these two things. If Dexter was doing bad things, Dexter rides a very, very fine line, which is why it's good for illustrating sort of like how you can play around with this line between anti-hero and evil protagonist. If Dexter thought, oh, everything that I'm doing is fine, this is totally normal, everybody is that way, I think that you would have to end up with him being an evil protagonist instead of remaining an anti-hero till the admittedly disappointing end of the show. But this particular trait of the anti-hero, that they know or think something is very deeply wrong with them, makes them very good candidates to be the cinnamon roll in your story. The cinnamon roll is a term that I use a lot, that I toss around a lot, that I bring up often in conversations with authors that I work with. I really think that a cinnamon roll goes a long way for making your reader love your character. Because one of the best things about a cinnamon roll type character, and just for reference, when I say cinnamon roll, I'm talking about the meme, a precious cinnamon roll, too good for this world, too pure. So there's lots of cinnamon rolls in fiction, like Aang from Avatar: The Last Airbender is a cinnamon roll, and people are like, oh my god, what a good and precious boy, I want to protect him and see him grow up healthy and strong. But there is a whole nother class of readers, and they sometimes will do this in problematic ways, but there is a whole nother class of readers who will, as a verb, cinnamon roll anti-heroes just endlessly. And when they cinnamon roll an anti-hero, it is because the anti-hero has extremely low self-esteem and thinks that they themselves are a piece of crap. And when you see a character who thinks they're a piece of crap but continually does the right thing and helps the people around them and wants to achieve good in the world, there's just a lot of readers out there who will go, oh, my precious baby. I love having that reaction myself to somebody who's a walking trash pile but is basically a good person, and I love, love, love creating that reaction in readers. It's just one of my favorite things, and anti-heroes are real good at it. Again, I want to clarify. I approve of cinnamon rolling anti-heroes. I do not approve of cinnamon rolling motherfuckers like Kylo Ren, okay? I just want that out there right now. It's not okay. He's a Nazi. He's a Nazi. He's a Nazi. Okay, so all this being sort of like understood and explained, what are some more tips and tricks for creating a relatable anti-hero that your reader will care about? Okay, so very, very early on, if you want to establish them as an anti-hero in the first place and let your reader know what sort of story they're in for, you need to establish both that they are a good person and that they are in opposition to societal norms. Now, this is very easy to do if your story is in a contemporary setting, for example, or even something like urban fantasy, where there may be fantastical elements, but it's still taking place in our world. Because we all kind of know what the societal norms are, and if we see somebody acting boorishly or drunkenly or whatever, we know that they're in opposition to what most people would consider proper. Sometimes you have to do a little bit more work if it's a science fiction or fantasy setting, although in general, you know, you're writing for a particular audience, so again, drunkenness, rudeness, not following the law or authority figures are sort of universally seen as like signs of an anti-hero. So it's easy to establish that they're not exactly big fans of authority and the law. How do you still establish the hero part? That they are a good person and not just an asshole. Not that they're not an asshole, just that they're not just an asshole. Well, as always, Save the Cat is extremely applicable here. The book was literally named after the Save the Cat moment, which is a moment near the beginning of your screenplay, or in our case, book, where your hero does something like save a cat from a tree that lets the audience know, hey, this is a pretty good guy. It doesn't have to be that simple, but anything that you can do near the beginning to establish for your reader, hey, one tiny little moment here, you can see that this person has a heart of gold, that they are a good person, that they want to help, that they have some trait that you would find admirable. But just like the anti-hero themselves, you have to ride that line between like good person, but not, you don't want to do anything that's out of character for them. Like having your anti-hero call to report a pickpocket to the cops is just, at that point, they're not really much of an anti-hero. Your anti-hero could, however, grab the pickpocket as they're trying to run away with their loot, snatch it out of their hand, shove the person away, and, you know, like they take off running, and then walk back to the victim and hand them back half of the cash that was stolen and say, hey, I grabbed this from that kid while they were running by, but I could only get half of it. Yeah, he got away with the rest. That kind of sucks. That's a really good save the cat moment, and it's a good indication that, oh, this person's a little on the shady side, but, you know, basically they're not too bad. You could say that an anti-hero is more flaw than positive trait. That's not necessarily always true, but it's a good sort of framework to base it off of. Just make sure that the flaws are not so overpowering in the character that they make your reader unable to see the good that lies within. That's all I've got for you today, writer. Thank you so much to That Ninja for the question. I hope that you and others found the answer helpful. A reminder to the rest of you that my $5 patrons on Patreon, like That Ninja, are the only ones who can ask questions for me to cover in these videos, and they also get the videos 2 weeks ahead of everyone else. You can be one of those awesome and incredibly attractive individuals by clicking on my Patreon link in the description below, or you can pick up the Writer Wednesday t-shirt. It tells people you're a writer so you don't have to. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next Wednesday. Bye!